So what is West Virginia's new offensive coordinator, Graham Harrell, all about when it comes to offensive play calling and his philosophy? Stay tuned and we'll talk about it. What is up, college sports fans, fellow members of Mountaineer Nation? This is Coos, coming to you once again from the hills of wild and wonderful Almost Heaven, West Virginia. This is Coos' Corner. I'm serving college sports content several times a week. If that's for you, hit the red subscribe button. If you like this here video, give me the thumbs up, please. Check out all my links in the description box, the ways you can help me out by making purchases on Amazon, Fanatics, and also have a Patreon page. Now let's get on with the show. I'm doing this video on Monday, January 24th, and last week, Graham Harrell, the new offensive coordinator for West Virginia, sat down with Dan Zangrilli of the Mountaineer Insider podcast for an interview. A lot of interesting takeaways from that interview, and I kind of want to go over a few of them here. After I give you my thoughts and takeaways from that interview, I want to show an interview I had the privilege of doing with Matt Zemek from TrojansWire.com, who covers USC football. He's going to give us some insight into Graham Harrell and what the folks over in Southern California think about him, and what USC Trojan fans think about him, and what he thinks about him. So hopefully that'll give us some insight from their point of view as well. But first, let's go over the takeaways from Dan Zangrilli's interview last week. Number one, when it comes to Harrell's expectations, he has really high expectations for his offense. They expect to score on every possession. They expect to have a lot of big plays. The offense is built on big plays and explosive plays. And we all know that's the one thing West Virginia has lacked the last 3 years. Very few explosive plays. They've been few and far between. So I was happy to hear that answer. And, him being an air raid guy, we all know that's pretty much what the air raid offense is built on. And we saw a lot of that under Dana Holgorsen. Even though us fans may have had a lot of complaints about Dana, you can never say his offenses were stale and that they weren't capable of making big plays, because they always were. So hopefully we're getting that back with Graham Harrell. Another takeaway is Harrell talked about his offense and how he likes to keep things simple. He wants to make sure his quarterback and all of his players really, but mainly his quarterback, doesn't have to think too much out there. Because if you have to think too much, then you can't execute. And the way he does that is by keeping the playbook simple. Instead of trying to give them 100 plays to remember, he gives them 30. He just used those numbers as examples, but he said they get really good at running 30 plays instead of trying to get good at running 100, because you can't get good at running 100. You have to keep it simple, reduce your playbook, and just find the plays you're really good at based on the personnel you have, and run those plays a lot. Rep them a lot at practice and get really good at them so that you can execute them to near perfection in games. I also remember Dana Holgorsen saying something similar to that one time in an interview where he talked about his offense being really simple, and they focus on being great at a few plays instead of okay or good at a lot of plays. And for the same reasons. He didn't want his guys thinking too much, because if you think, it slows you down. If you slow down, you're not going to perform well. When asked about quarterbacks and the current quarterbacks on the roster, Graham Harrell talked about the three freshman quarterbacks he's coached in his career. He had one at North Texas. I don't know the kid's name. I haven't had a chance to research it, but if you know his name, leave it in the comments for me. But we all know that he coached Kedon Slovis and Jaxson Dart, both at USC, as true freshmen, and both of them did well. The kid at North Texas did well. So he has a really good track record of coaching young quarterbacks, even true freshman quarterbacks. And we know he's going to have to do that again at West Virginia with incoming freshman Nico Marchiol, and also with the two young sophomores we got in the room in Garrett Green and Goose Crowder. Now, when asked about the three quarterbacks, Dan asked him to comment on the three quarterbacks he had, and there were some things really interesting about his comments. Maybe I'm reading too much into this. If I am, you tell me in the comments. But when he talked about Garrett Green, the only thing he said was he's a good player and he can run around and make plays. That was pretty much the extent of his comments. When he asked him about Nico, he said, well, I already knew Nico a little bit because I recruited him when I was at USC. He's a good player, and I look forward to working with him. But he stressed the fact that he already had a relationship with Nico, which I think is a positive. At least I hope it's a positive. Hopefully Nico liked him when he was being recruited by him. And then he asked him about Will Goose Crowder. And he talked a lot more about Goose than he did the other two guys. When he talked about Goose, he said that when Goose walks into a room, you can feel his presence. So what that tells me is Goose has the it factor that all quarterbacks need to be successful. And he also talked about Goose being in his office multiple times already, and that he's probably talked to him more than any of them. To me, that's a good sign. I feel like what he had to say about Goose and what he didn't have to say about Garrett tells me that he probably feels Goose is a better fit for his offense and that they have a better relationship. And he talked about, during this conversation, how important it is for the quarterback to have the intangibles. He said it was as important, if not more important, for them to have the intangibles as far as mentally than it was to have the physical tools. And he feels like Goose has that. So that's a great sign. I know we didn't get a chance to watch Goose play much last year. A lot of us fans were clamoring for that later in the season. Maybe we'll actually get a chance this year to see what Goose can do, see how good this kid can spin it. A couple other things that stood out in the conversation. When he was asked about the biggest challenge he faces in rebuilding this offense, he had a long pause, and he seemed like he was very cautious with his answer, as he should be. But that kind of made me think that maybe he feels like he has a lot to improve on, and he didn't want to come out and say that. But maybe I'm reading too much into that. But it kind of concerned me that he had to think so long for an answer, and had to be so careful in what he said. But he wouldn't be lying. The offense was really bad last year. It's really been bad the last 3 years. So there's a lot of work there to do, and I'm sure he didn't want to call any players out. And he did also talk about how he hadn't had a chance to watch a lot of film yet, so he really didn't want to comment too much, and I understand that. He hasn't been in town long, and ever since he's been in town, he's been out on the road recruiting. So he probably hasn't had a lot of time to watch film on our guys yet. But he'll have plenty of time throughout the winter and spring to do that. So I'm sure he will definitely get familiar with these guys between now and the beginning of the season. He has, it's January. He's got, 7 months to prepare to get familiar with the players and personnel he has. So I'm not worried about that. But the other thing he talked about, Dan asked Graham about his experience playing behind Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. Interestingly, Graham talked about Aaron Rodgers and his attention to detail. And he said that is something he's brought with him at his coaching stops. Because he said that's not something you pick up necessarily in the Mike Leach air raid type offense. It's not a real detail-oriented offense, which I found to be extremely interesting. But he said it's basically just run to a spot and get open. That's the essence of it. Whereas Aaron looked at every detail as far as playing quarterback, footwork and everything. He wanted his feet to be perfect. During practices, Aaron would go over on the side and take other guys with him, and they'd work on their footwork together while, the rest of the team was doing something else, because it was really important for him to get his footwork right. And he would have people say, hey, is my footwork right? For example, he would have some of his receivers over there working with him. They'd be talking about, hey, is my footwork right? Am I getting this right? What do I need to do? Aaron wanted to get it perfect. And Graham Harrell took that away from Aaron Rodgers and has kind of brought that with him to West Virginia and to his previous stops. So I think that's good. And Neal Brown is extremely detail-oriented guy as well. So hopefully that will help those two to work well together. But then you balance it out with the simpleness of the air raid offense that will prevent the guys from thinking a lot. That basically what that means is they're going to leave all the thinking up to the coaching staff and let the players just play. And I like that. I really like that approach. I'm a big fan of the air raid offense. It's exciting to watch, and they should be able to put points on the board. I had the privilege of sitting down with Matt Zemek from TrojansWire.com. Matt covers the USC Trojans, obviously, so he's gotten to see Graham Harrell a lot the last 3 years. Get to know a little bit about his offense and how he operates. So I really hope you enjoy Matt's take on Graham Harrell and what Matt and the USC Trojan fans and others thought about him. So hopefully you'll, and this is a perspective I wanted to bring to Mountaineer Nation and to my viewers. Hopefully you enjoy it. What's going on, everybody? This is Coos, and I'm here with Matt Zemek. Matt, how you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Matt, if you don't mind, tell my listeners, my viewers, where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm the editor of Trojans Wire, where we're under the Gannett USA Today umbrella, trojanswire.usatoday.com for USC coverage. We're out here waiting for Caleb Williams news and how that's going to go. And it's also going to be very interesting to see where Jaxson Dart ultimately lands and also how Graham Harrell does with your West Virginia Mountaineers.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great segue into what I want to talk about. Reason I brought you on here today, I thought I've seen you on the Voice of College Football, obviously. You do a lot of work with Mark over there. And what was your, and obviously you cover USC, so what was your initial reaction when you heard that we had hired Graham Harrell? Did you think it was a good hire for us or a bad hire? What was your thoughts?
Well, I do follow national college football as well, and I'm certainly well aware that Neal Brown has underperformed in his first few years. And more specifically, I'm aware that Neal Brown doesn't just have a program that's struggling, but it's a program that isn't really fun to watch. And it's the old saying: if you're going to be bad, at least be exciting, right?
Right.
The worst sin than being bad is being bad and boring. And that's the ditch that West Virginia fell into. And so I think the Graham Harrell hire is fundamentally a good one, if only because it shows that Neal Brown knows he needs to entrust the offense to somebody else. He needs to get better in recruiting. He needs to get better in managing the overall program. You can't get lost in the weeds trying to micromanage the offense. So I think that's a healthy administrative move from Neal Brown in terms of it's a shift in terms of he's not trying to be a helicopter parent. He's going to give the offense to a veteran coordinator, who has some experience in that realm, and I think that can help West Virginia. Now, in terms of Graham Harrell's larger identity and profile, I know you'll want to ask me about it, so I can just address it right now. The thing with Graham Harrell, it's hard to get a precise read on him and exactly how good he is, exactly how ready he is for the challenge at West Virginia, because USC did not put Graham Harrell in a position to succeed. Now, obviously, we could have the debate about, did Graham Harrell put his quarterbacks in a position to succeed? And that's fair. Like there's a lot going on at USC that has to be sorted out in order for West Virginia fans to know what they're getting in Graham Harrell. But it's complicated. I can just tell you that, and we need to flesh that out. So USC got its butt kicked a lot this past season. And more to the point, Trojans gave up over 40 points to a lot of opponents. Utah, Stanford, Oregon State, UCLA scored 62. And so games were USC was down 15, 17, 20 points midway through the third quarter of a lot of its games. So you can't really judge an offensive coordinator when the defense is just getting completely smoked. Like you don't have a normal game plan, you don't have a normal script, you don't have a normal anything. So
Right.
and so Graham Harrell and USC, they passed the ball a lot in 2020, did it a lot again in 2021. And so you could say that Graham Harrell's in love with the forward pass. He doesn't care about the run, but when you're always trailing by bunches of points in third quarters, you can't really assess run pass mix, play sequencing, and those other kinds of topics. You can't really assess them in a normal way. Another big variable that was in play at USC the past 2 years is that USC did not have an air raid. That's, of course, the offense Graham Harrell ran. USC did not have an air raid offensive line coach in 2020. That's Tim Drevno. He got fired at the end of 2020. Interestingly enough, he's now been signed by Chip Kelly as UCLA's offensive line coach just across the way. But anyway, Drevno was not an air raid coach. So Clay Helton, before he got fired, this was in the offseason a year ago, he realized he needed to give Graham Harrell an air raid specific offensive line coach. So he hired Clay McGuire, who had worked in the air raid system under Mike Leach at Washington State. And so, USC should have had an air raid offensive line coach while Graham Harrell was there. But of course, Clay Helton's not a good coach. He's a lazy coach. He didn't get the administrative details right. So he saddled Graham Harrell with a guy who really wasn't suited to be the right offensive line coach. But he finally brought in an air raid guy, Clay McGuire. And so it was going to be a transition year for USC. Clay McGuire teaching how to block within the air raid system, that was going to be a work in progress. And what did we see? We saw the USC offensive line become a better run blocking line late in the season, especially in the late season game against BYU. Like, that's the game. If you're a West Virginia fan, you're looking at tape from that USC BYU game as proof that Graham Harrell can run the ball, that he's willing to run the ball if he needs to, that it's not just winging it around the field. USC ran the ball well against a good BYU defense. And also in that game, the USC defense competed. It's kind of weird. USC's defense really didn't compete very much in Pac-12 play, but against BYU, didn't give up, 45, 50 points. That was a 35-31 game with BYU scoring very late. So BYU was under 30 points until the final minutes, and you had Graham Harrell running the ball, mixing in the passing game with Jaxson Dart. So that's a template for Graham Harrell being able to show varied looks and a willingness to run the ball. So I think Graham Harrell likes to pass the ball. Like, that's his default setting, but he showed in that BYU game an awareness of the need to run the ball when he has to. So, but USC's program and its 2021 season were so dysfunctional that I would caution anyone, positive or negative, doesn't matter. I'd caution anyone to form an overly specific verdict on Graham Harrell. It's complicated.
Well, I appreciate you clearing that up, because I've seen a lot of negative comments, not only on my videos, and then I've also seen some negative comments from USC fans on Facebook about it, saying that he wasn't a good play caller and things of that nature. And I think one comment I read was that the offense was only as good as it was statistically because they had really good players, that it had nothing to do with him. So, I mean, it just, but I don't know if, that's just fans being fans. We can be very fickle. We can be very overly critical of our coaches. And I know that, because we're like that too here at times. But so it's good to hear you say that, because I one of my points was this, because West Virginia had the opposite problem. Our offense was constantly putting our defense in bad situations.
Yeah.
So and even though our defense statistically didn't look great this year, if you watched a lot of West Virginia games, our defense won some games for us this year. Our defense played pretty darn good. Their statistical numbers aren't that great because, number one, they were on the field way too much because our offense couldn't move the football. And another thing, what USC fans don't realize, us at West Virginia are so excited about the Graham Harrell hire. They're like, well, you guys shouldn't get too excited. And I'm like, you don't realize we've been in the bottom third of the nation in offense for 3 years in a row. We're not used to that here. We had Dana Holgorsen here for 7 years. And that guy, he wasn't, we didn't have great teams every year, but at least we had good offenses every year, just about. So, we're not used to having stale offenses here. So we're excited to have a guy back here that is exciting again and will make offense exciting again, like you said in your opening statements there. Even if we don't win a lot of games, or we're at least not going to be boring anymore, hopefully. And that's what we're kind of hanging our hat on.
Yeah, and as we try and sift through these various complications and plot points, one thing that has to be kept in mind is that Kedon Slovis got injured early in the season. So Jaxson Dart at USC filled in week 3 and played great against Washington State, but he got injured. So Jaxson Dart was then on the shelf for several more weeks. He didn't resurface until the very end of October against Arizona. So you got a very small sample size from Jaxson Dart. And it's not as though Graham Harrell and Jaxson Dart had the chance to have a full season, in which they could build and establish continuity. And one of the things which emerged in the comparison between Kedon Slovis and Jaxson Dart is that Jaxson Dart's a legitimate dual threat quarterback, that he can make significant plays with his legs. Kedon Slovis never has the desire or the ability to run long distances the way Jaxson Dart can. And so the fact that Graham Harrell and Jaxson Dart worked really well that brings up the larger point that if you give Graham Harrell a dual threat quarterback as opposed to a pure pocket passer such as Kedon Slovis, who never displays any desire or willingness to run, you get more upside with Graham Harrell and the dual threat quarterback. And I know that you're excited about Nico,
Yes.
your new quarterback prospect. So what he brings to the table has to be factored into this, right? It's not just you're not just getting the offensive coordinator, you're considering how the offensive coordinator and the quarterback work in tandem. And from everything I've heard about Nico, I think that Graham Harrell is certainly a guy who can unlock the full measure of his talents. So, I USC fans were critical of Graham Harrell, and frankly, let's be honest, they should have been. USC failed to make a bowl game. All right, like that is an embarrassment.
Right.
It's like the
Absolutely.
New York Yankees losing 100 games in a season. Like that is embarrassing on a large scale. So of course they should be upset with him. But the cautionary note for all the USC fans who were rightly disappointed with Graham Harrell is that he was working under Clay Helton. Imagine Graham Harrell working under an elite head coach. You're obviously going to get a better architecture, a better infrastructure surrounding Graham Harrell. So that's like the cautionary note on Graham Harrell. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of his because Kedon Slovis did regress, but I would also say that Jaxson Dart brought things to the table that Kedon Slovis did not possess, and that when Harrell worked with Dart, good things happened for the USC offense. So I'm just in a position where I don't, I have strong opinions on a lot of coaches. I mean, I write about and cover college football for a living, have done it for 20 years. So believe me, when there's a situation where I think there's a strong verdict, that needs to be put forth, I'll make it. But Graham Harrell's not one of those coaches because there's just been way too many moving parts at USC. It's just there are too many variables floating in the air. This is one of those cases in which I can see the positive side, I can see the negative side. And I think that on balance, though, West Virginia is going to have an offensive staff, which is going to represent a clear upgrade from what it's had the past few years. I think that's the takeaway that West Virginia fans should be making in all of this.
Yeah, and that's what we're excited about. And we've been clamoring for Neal Brown, even though Neal Brown's known as an offensive guy. Our offense has just not been getting it done. So we were all kind of clamoring for him. Even the folks that look, I don't think Neal Brown deserves to be fired yet. I don't think he's had enough time to build the program to his liking yet. But I was one who said he needs to make some changes, and one of those changes I wanted was for him to bring somebody else in to call the plays, because we had a lot of issues this year with clock management, personnel management, and all of that stuff. And some of that, I think, was because he was trying to do all of that while at the same time trying to call plays. And I know he's done it in the past, but, it's different playing at a Power 5 school than it is at Troy. No offense to Troy, but the expectations are higher there. You've got a lot more to do during the week as far as, media responsibilities and all that. There's not as much time to sit down and put together a game plan. So let somebody else do that while you go do your head coaching duties. And he finally gave up that position and decided to make this move. So we're all excited about it because we can't get much worse. To us, there's not much, no way to go but up. That's how
I watched the bowl game, so yeah, there you can't get any worse on offense than that. Yeah,
it was brutal. I mean, how do you, with 3 weeks to prepare, that's what we look like. It was embarrassing. So, what is Graham Harrell as a recruiter? Is he a good recruiter in your mind?
It's hard to say that like he's an elite closer level recruiter. And part of this though is that I don't know how much you read about Clay Helton when he got fired in mid-September, but like Bruce Feldman and USC writer Antonio Morales of The Athletic unspooled this big long expose about how lazy Clay Helton was as a recruiter. So Graham Harrell, he's part of the story only in the sense that like he was under Clay Helton's larger operation or lack thereof. Right. So it's really hard to make a judgment about Graham Harrell as a recruiter because Clay Helton was just one of the laziest recruiters out there. I mean, let's just step back in terms of assessing USC, because in order to assess Graham Harrell, you have to assess USC. Why did Mario Cristobal and Oregon control the Pac-12? Why were they generally the strongest program out there? It's because Cristobal was able to go into Southern California and raid Clay Helton. Clay Helton was not able to, using the recruiting terminology, build a fence around, the larger Los Angeles, Southern California area. And so that just speaks to how lazy and how ultimately inadequate Clay Helton was as a recruiter. Cristobal and other coaches were able to go down there. I mean, Lincoln Riley plucked one top Southern California high school prospect after another, brought them to Norman. Like, if you're wanting to be in Norman instead of Los Angeles, what does that say about how the USC head coach is running his shop? So, you can't lay that at Graham Harrell's feet. And it really leaves that question open. I would say that, the fact that Graham Harrell chose West Virginia, as opposed to, say, he could have been maybe the offensive coordinator at Washington State, where, Washington State has a history of the air raid under Mike Leach. Obviously, you have a new head coach there now, but there was a sense that Graham Harrell could have thrown his hat into the ring for that. Maybe there was a thought that, at SMU, when Sonny Dykes left to go to TCU, maybe Graham Harrell would land there. He chose West Virginia. So that, he didn't have to choose it. He chose it. Like, he wanted to be at West Virginia. So what does that say? It's Big 12. And Graham Harrell is a Texas guy, Texas native, played at Texas Tech. So I think that, his familiarity with the Big 12 landscape, with Texas, that certainly puts him in a position to recruit in the state of Texas, right? I mean, that just makes natural sense as part of West Virginia's and Neal Brown's plans to get their foot more fully in the door in the state of Texas. I would have to think that that's the recruiting strategy there. Now, how adequate, how ready Graham Harrell is to recruit from the state, and how ready he is to help West Virginia in the transfer portal, now that's the great unknown. And so, as much as I'd like to give a firm answer, I have to say that it's just an unknown, because when you coach under Clay Helton, you're not getting the best in terms of game management, recruiting, administration. I mean, Clay Helton just took this USC program and he ran it into the ground. And Sam Darnold was the only thing separating Clay Helton from being fired much earlier. Like, Clay Helton went 5-7 in 2018. He wasn't fired only because Sam Darnold carried him to the Rose Bowl and in 2016, and then to the Pac-12 title a year later in 2017. Without Darnold, who, we need to remember, Clay Helton didn't choose him as the starter at the beginning of the 2016 season. It's only after USC went 1-2 in those first 3 games that Clay Helton finally made the change. So Graham Harrell being under Clay Helton, it just clouds the issue. It's hard to give a clear answer on just how good a recruiter Graham Harrell is.
All right, I appreciate that. And that, so basically, just like how good of an OC is he actually? I guess the verdict's still out at this point.
It is
because of all the unknowns surrounding the USC program and the issues that were there in the overall big picture of the program. Not just the offense, but everything was just bad. Is that a good summary of what?
Absolutely. And it's just when you work under a bad head coach, that's just going to distort so much about your record. I mean, we can just put this plainly, that if you fail under a good head coach, like, isn't that a much, much clearer indicator that you're not cut out for the job? Like, if you fail under Nick Saban, if you fail under Dabo Swinney, then you're probably not ready for the big leagues. But if you fail under Clay Helton, hey, now maybe you shouldn't have joined Clay Helton, so we can put your decision-making skills under the spotlight there. Right. But in terms of just doing your job as a recruiter, as a play caller, as a game day schemer, as a developer of talent, when you're working under a bad head coach, and Clay Helton was an unambiguously bad head coach at USC, it's really hard to judge Graham Harrell. So it's not the sexy answer, but it's the responsible one, and we just have to live with that uncertainty. And I think that going to West Virginia, it's going to show us meaning not just you in Morgantown and in the state of West Virginia. It's also going to show us here out west just how good Graham Harrell really is. It's going to be interesting to follow.
Yeah.
And of course, you have Graham Harrell going against his former USC quarterback, Kedon Slovis, in the backyard brawl. How great is that? I mean, it's awesome. I'm gonna be covering USC football that Saturday, but that's the other game I'm not gonna be sure not to miss. It's gonna be amazing.
Very good storyline, and I can't help but wonder if Graham Harrell had been hired at West Virginia a couple months earlier, would Kedon Slovis be at West Virginia now instead of Pitt?
Great question.
Can't help but wonder that.
Great question. Or at least would he have not gone to Pitt, knowing that that's a rival of West Virginia?
Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
All right, Matt, I appreciate you sharing that information with us. And I appreciate you coming on, Matt. And I hope my viewers enjoyed it. Everybody check Matt out at trojanswire.com. Is that correct, Matt?
Trojanswire.usatoday.com, and on Twitter at Trojans Wire. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, and this was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a good one.
All right. You too.